2 weeks before I drove across the state looking for my missing fiancé, he was helping me choose flowers for our wedding. When I finally found him, he wasn't sick. He wasn't dealing with some private family crisis. He hadn't lost his phone. He had been spending those 2 weeks with his ex-girlfriend, trying to decide whether marrying me was still the right choice. And somehow, he expected me to keep waiting while he figured it out. My name is Chana Taylor. I'm 29 years old. And until that month, I thought I knew exactly where my life was going. I had been with Frank Burns for 3 years. He was 27. Funny in that effortless way where he could make me laugh even when I was trying to stay mad. And he had this habit of reaching for my hand under restaurant tables, like touching me, was automatic. When he proposed the previous summer, I didn't hesitate. By spring, we were planning a summer wedding. We had toured venues and spent one ridiculous Saturday debating whether eucalyptus looked romantic or like expensive weeds. That was how normal things were. Then one Thursday evening, Frank told me he wanted to visit his hometown. "My sister keeps asking when I'm coming back," he said. "I haven't spent real time with everybody in months." I didn't think anything of it. His family lived several hours away, and Frank really was close with his older sister. "How long?" "Maybe 2 weeks." I teased him about abandoning me with wedding vendors. He kissed my forehead. "You'll survive." The next morning, I watched him load a duffel bag into his car. He kissed me goodbye. "Love you? Love you too." There was no argument before he left. No suspicious hesitation. No warning that the man I was planning to marry was about to quietly put our relationship on hold. He simply drove away. That night, he called to tell me he'd arrived safely. We talked for maybe 15 minutes. Completely normal. Then, the next afternoon, Frank called again. His voice sounded different. "Hey," he said. "Can we talk?" I was making coffee. "Sure. What's wrong?" There was a pause. "I think I need some time to think." My hand stopped halfway toward the sugar jar. "Think about what?" Another pause. "The wedding." "I don't know." My stomach tightened. "What does that mean?" "I just feel like I need some time for myself." I stood completely still in my kitchen. "Frank, did I do something?" "No." "Are you having second thoughts?" "I didn't say that." "Then what are you saying?" He exhaled. "I don't know how to explain it yet." That answer scared me more than almost anything he could have said, but I didn't want to become the controlling fiancé who couldn't allow her partner a little space. So I swallowed every question fighting its way up my throat. "Okay," I said quietly. "If you need space, I'll give you space. But please don't shut me out." "I won't." That was the last real conversation we had for almost 2 weeks. I sent one message the next morning. "Hope you're okay. I'm here when you're ready." No response. A few days later, I called. Straight to voicemail. Frank normally posted constantly online. Food photos, gym pictures, stupid memes. Suddenly, nothing. I contacted his sister. "Have you seen Frank? I'm getting worried." Her answer came almost an hour later. "Not much. He's been doing his own thing." "Sorry." Doing his own thing. What exactly was his own thing? We hadn't had some major fight or weeks of tension. One week we were choosing flowers. The next, apparently, I wasn't even entitled to a returned phone call. By day 12, worry had curdled into suspicion. Was he really staying with family? Was there someone else? On the 14th day, I stopped waiting. I threw clothes into an overnight bag, filled my gas tank, and started driving. The entire trip, I rehearsed reasonable explanations. Maybe Frank was struggling emotionally. Maybe something was happening with his family. Maybe he'd panicked about marriage and didn't know how to admit it. But another possibility kept crawling into my mind no matter how many times I pushed it away. Maybe I wasn't driving there to save my engagement. Maybe I was driving there to find out whether I still had one. By the time I reached his parents' neighborhood, my hands were gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles hurt. His car was outside. At least I knew he was there. I knocked. Footsteps approached. Then the door opened. Frank froze. That expression told me more than any text could have. Chana. Hi. What are you doing here? Not exactly the greeting you expect from the man you're supposed to marry. You stopped answering me. I told you I needed space. You said you needed time. You didn't say you were disappearing. He glanced behind him, then stepped aside. Come in. We sat in the living room. Frank suddenly became fascinated with meaningless questions. How was traffic? Fine. You want water? No. You hungry? No. Finally, I looked straight at him. Frank. He stopped. What is going on? His eyes dropped to the carpet. I've been trying to figure some things out. What things? Silence. My heartbeat started pounding. Then Frank rubbed both hands over his face. I ran into Chloe. I knew the name immediately. Chloe Bennett, his ex-girlfriend. The serious relationship before me. I stared at him. When? The second day I was here. And? We saw each other at the grocery store. Something in his voice made my stomach turn. And? We talked. I almost laughed. Because nobody ghosts their fiancé for 2 weeks because of a conversation beside frozen vegetables. How much talking? Frank's jaw tightened. Chana. How much? We've spent some time together. There it was. A sentence designed to reveal just enough truth without naming what it really meant. I leaned back. You've been ignoring me because you're spending time with your ex-girlfriend? It isn't like that. What is it like? I needed to know whether I still had unresolved feelings. For several seconds, I genuinely couldn't speak. Finally, I said, We're engaged. I know. We're planning a wedding. I know. And you decided the appropriate time to investigate your feelings for another woman was now? His face hardened defensively. I didn't plan to see her. You planned everything after seeing her. That landed. He looked away. I didn't want to marry you while wondering. Something inside me shifted. Not broke. Shifted. Because suddenly the issue became painfully simple. So instead, you put me on a shelf while you tested whether Chloe might still be an option. That's not fair. Fair? My voice stayed surprisingly quiet. You disappeared for 2 weeks, Frank. I didn't know whether you were having some kind of breakdown, whether something happened to your family, whether you'd changed your mind about marrying me. Meanwhile, you knew exactly why you weren't calling. I was confused. You were selfish. He flinched. I didn't want to hurt you. You don't get credit for that after hurting me. His eyes finally met mine. I needed clarity. And where exactly does that leave me? He hesitated, just for a second. But sometimes, 1 second is enough to end 3 years. I stood. Chana, wait. No. Can we just talk about this? I've been trying to talk to you for 2 weeks. I picked up my bag. He followed me toward the door. I just need a little more time. I turned around. For the first time since arriving, I wasn't afraid of what Frank might decide. Because I was finally thinking about something he apparently hadn't considered. What I might decide. So I looked at the man I had planned to marry and repeated the sentence he'd given me 14 days earlier. I think I need some time to think. His eyes widened. Chana. But I was already walking away. The drive home felt endless. Halfway back, I had to pull into a gas station because tears had blurred the road in front of me. It wasn't even Chloe who hurt the most. It was realizing Frank had believed I would stay exactly where he'd left me, while he compared his past to his future. When I finally told my friend Marcus what happened, he shook his head. If you're engaged to someone, you don't audition their replacement. That sentence stayed with me. A week later, my phone lit up. Frank. For 1 stupid second, my heart reacted before my brain did. I opened the message. Hey, how are you? That was it. No apology, no explanation, no acknowledgement that he'd detonated our engagement. I didn't respond. And strangely, his silence stopped feeling like punishment. It started feeling like an answer. I began accepting there might not be a wedding. Losing deposits and plans hurt, But marrying someone who needed to compare me with another woman scared me more. So I stopped waiting. Days passed. Then someone knocked on my apartment door. I opened it. Frank stood there smiling, still wearing his engagement ring. "Hey," he said casually. Then he walked inside, sat down on our couch, and said the last thing I expected. "I checked with the venue. They still have our wedding date." For a second, I genuinely thought I'd misunderstood him. Frank had disappeared for weeks, spent that time sorting out his feelings for Chloe, ignored nearly every attempt I made to reach him, and now he was sitting on my couch talking about our wedding venue, like we'd had a scheduling conflict, not a relationship-ending betrayal. "What?" "The venue," he repeated. "They haven't released our date yet." I stared at him. Frank leaned forward. "I was thinking we should keep it. Maybe lavender instead of sage green for the table settings. Lavender feels more timeless." I actually laughed. Not because anything was funny. It was the kind of short, disbelieving laugh your body makes when anger hasn't decided what shape to take yet. Frank stopped. "What? What are you doing here?" His expression changed. "I'm trying to fix things." "By choosing table settings?" "No." "Chana, come on. I figured everything out." "What exactly did you figure out?" His eyes met mine. "Chloe and I are done." I said nothing. I don't have feelings for her anymore. Seeing her made me realize what we had was in the past. I needed closure. "And now?" "Now I know I want you." The words should have meant something. A month earlier, they would have meant everything. Now they just made me tired. "So that's it?" He frowned. "What?" "You tested the alternative, didn't like it enough, and now you're back." "That isn't what happened." "It sounds exactly like what happened. I didn't cheat on you." "I didn't say you did." "Then why are you acting like I had an affair?" "Because you're still trying to make this about technicalities." Frank's jaw tightened. I was confused. "And I was your fiancé." "I know that." "Do you?" My voice rose despite my effort to stay calm. "You treated me like a reservation you could keep while you checked whether something better was available. That is not fair. You keep saying that whenever I describe exactly what you did." He went quiet. Then finally, "I made a mistake." It was the closest thing to an admission I'd heard. "I didn't want to marry you while wondering about Chloe." "And you know what you should have done?" "What?" "Talk to me." His eyes dropped. "You could have called and said, 'I ran into Chloe. It stirred something up, and I'm confused.' Instead, you disappeared." "I didn't know what to say." "So you said nothing." He exhaled. "Kana, I'm sorry." I looked at him. Maybe he meant it. That was the difficult part. Frank wasn't some cartoon villain who enjoyed watching me suffer. I believed he regretted hurting me, but regret wasn't the same thing as trust. He stepped closer. "I handled it badly. I know that. But I'm here now. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." "Whatever it takes?" "Yes." My eyes dropped to his hand. His engagement ring was still there. The same ring I'd put on his finger after saying yes to spending the rest of my life with him. For some reason, seeing it made everything suddenly clear. "Take it off." Frank followed my gaze. "What?" "The ring." His face changed. "Chana." "Take it off." "You don't mean that." "I do." He stared at me for several seconds. Then slowly, he twisted the ring from his finger. He held it in his palm. "Is this really what you want?" "No," I said. For the first time, he looked hopeful. I continued. "What I wanted was the man I was engaged to before he disappeared for 2 weeks to figure out whether he still wanted his ex." His hope vanished. "I don't get that version of you back." I held out my hand. "And I'm not marrying this one." Frank placed the ring in my palm. It felt strangely heavy. 3 years, he said quietly. "You're throwing away 3 years because I got confused?" I closed my fingers around the ring. "No, I'm refusing to throw away the next 30 because you did." He looked stunned. People make mistakes. Yes. And couples work through them. Sometimes. So why won't you even try? Because I don't trust you anymore. That silenced him. What happens the next time you're confused, Frank? What happens when marriage gets hard? Do you disappear again until you decide whether I'm still what you want? I wouldn't. You already did. His eyes dropped. That was the end of it. He walked toward the door, then stopped with his hand on the knob. I came back because I chose you. I looked at him. And you still don't understand. He turned. I wasn't waiting to be chosen. Frank left. That night, I put both engagement rings in the back of a kitchen drawer. For the first time in weeks, I slept without my phone beside me. The next few days weren't magically easy. There were wedding vendors to contact. People who knew we were engaged asked uncomfortable questions. Every cancellation made the breakup feel more official, but underneath the grief was something I hadn't felt in weeks. Relief. Then, Sam Reed. One of Frank's longtime friends texted to check on me. Sam and I had always gotten along, but we'd never really talked one-on-one. He'd been through a messy engagement himself, and after a few conversations, he invited me for coffee. It was nice having someone to talk to who didn't make me feel like the woman whose fiancé disappeared. But soon his messages became more frequent. Then, he invited me to dinner. That was when I realized Sam might be interested in something more. I wasn't. So afterward, I started creating some distance. I thought that would be the end of it. Apparently, someone told Frank. 2 evenings later, someone started pounding on my door. I already knew who it was before I opened it. I opened the door, but stayed in the doorway. "You've been seeing Sam?" Frank demanded. I blinked. "Hello to you too. My friend, Shauna?" The sheer entitlement almost impressed me. Why do you care? Because he's my friend. And it's humiliating. I stared at him. Humiliating? Yes. Something cold settled over me. You disappeared on your fiancé to explore unresolved feelings with your ex-girlfriend, but me having dinner with a single man after our engagement ended is humiliating to you. His face tightened. That's different. Of course it was. Everything was different when Frank was the one getting hurt. We're done, I said. Who I have coffee or dinner with isn't your business. So you're just moving on? What exactly did you expect me to do? I came back. I almost couldn't believe he'd said it. You came back? I realized I love you. And I told you it was too late. His voice rose. You don't just erase 3 years like that. You managed to erase me for 2 weeks. Frank went silent. You need to leave. His face flushed. So that's it? Yes. You're really choosing this? I'm choosing not to have this conversation again. He stared at me. You think you're better than me now? No. I held his gaze. I just finally stopped letting you decide what happens to me. His jaw tightened. You'll regret this. The words were quiet. That made them worse. I didn't flinch. Is that a threat? He stared at me. Don't think I'm just going to let this slide. There is nothing to let slide, Frank. We're over. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Then he turned and walked away. I closed the door and locked it behind him. I told myself he was angry, humiliated, that he'd cool down once he accepted the engagement was really over. And for the next few days, I heard nothing from him. Then Sam asked me to lunch. I agreed, because I wanted to make sure there was no misunderstanding between us. Halfway through the meal, I told him directly, Sam, I appreciate you being there for me, but I'm not looking for another relationship. I only want friendship. His face fell for a second. Then he nodded. Friends. Friends. I left the restaurant relieved, until I reached my car. Across the street, half a block away, a man was leaning against a streetlight with his phone in his hand. He looked down the moment I noticed him, but I'd spent 3 years memorizing that posture. It was Frank. And suddenly, his words from my doorway didn't sound like anger anymore. Don't think I'm just going to let this slide. I didn't confront Frank outside the restaurant. For a few seconds, I stood beside my car pretending to search through my purse while watching him from the corner of my eye. He never looked directly at me again. He just stared at his phone. Maybe it was coincidence. That was what I told myself. Frank had friends in the area. There were restaurants nearby. People ended up in the same places sometimes. So I got into my car and drove home. 3 days later, his car was parked half a block from my apartment. Same dark sedan. Same dent near the rear bumper. I slowed down. There was nobody inside. I parked, went upstairs, and locked my door. 20 minutes later, I looked through the window. The car was gone. That was harder to explain away. For the next few days, I didn't see him again. I started wondering whether I'd overreacted. Then one evening, I stopped for takeout after work and saw his car parked near the back of the lot, far enough from the entrance that I might not have noticed it if I hadn't already memorized every scratch on it. My hands tightened around the steering wheel. This time, I didn't tell myself a comforting story. I went inside, collected my food, and left. Frank never approached me. But 15 minutes later, when I reached my neighborhood, the same sedan was parked down the street from my apartment. Whatever doubt I'd had disappeared. He was following me. I walked straight inside, locked the door, and pulled out my phone. For a moment, I considered calling him. Then I remembered how every conversation with Frank became an argument about what he felt entitled to. So I texted instead. Frank, I've noticed you outside the restaurant and near my apartment. Stop following me. This isn't healthy, and it isn't going to change anything between us. I stared at the message, then added, do not come to my apartment again. Send. Nothing. No typing bubble. No angry response. No denial. Somehow, that silence bothered me more. I checked the window 20 minutes later. His car was gone. The next morning, it wasn't there. Neither was it there when I came home from work. A day passed, then 3, then a week. Frank disappeared from my life as abruptly as he'd disappeared from our relationship in the first place. Except this time, I wasn't waiting for him to come back. I canceled the last wedding appointment, moved the wedding folder off my desktop, and started saying yes when friends invited me out. Sam occasionally texted, but he respected the boundary I'd set. Slowly, my life started feeling like mine again. Then one Sunday, I finally opened the kitchen drawer where I'd put our rings. I hadn't touched them since the night Frank returned. For a while, I just looked at them. Those rings had once represented certainty. Now they reminded me how easily I'd confused a plan with a promise. Frank had come back believing that because he'd chosen me after Chloe, everything could simply resume. The venue, the flowers, the table settings, the future we'd planned. But while he was deciding between his past and his future, he'd given me time to make a decision too. Someone can love you and still treat you in a way that makes building a life with them impossible. Frank's mistake wasn't feeling confused about Chloe. His mistake was believing that confusion gave him permission to put me on hold while he explored his options. Then when I didn't stay where he'd left me, he acted betrayed. That wasn't the marriage I wanted. Weeks later, I heard Frank had returned to his hometown. I didn't ask whether he'd seen Chloe. For once, I genuinely didn't care. The old version of me would have wanted answers. Now I understood that none of them could change what happened. One evening, I was cleaning out a closet when I found a box of wedding samples we'd forgotten about. Invitation paper, ribbon, a dried sprig of eucalyptus. I laughed when I saw it. Frank had insisted eucalyptus looked like expensive weeds. I had argued with him for almost 20 minutes. For a second, the memory hurt. Then it didn't. I threw the samples away. I kept the eucalyptus. Not because I wanted something from the wedding, because I still liked it. For 3 years, I'd thought moving forward meant moving forward with Frank. Then for several weeks, I thought moving on meant proving I didn't need him. Both were wrong. Moving on was quieter than that. It was waking up without checking whether he'd texted, driving home without looking for his car, and realizing silence could feel peaceful when you stopped waiting for someone to fill it. Frank once told me he needed time to decide whether marrying me was the right choice. In the end, I suppose we both got the clarity he wanted. He discovered he wanted to come back. And I discovered I didn't want him to. I lost a fiancé, a wedding, and the future I'd spent 3 years imagining. But I didn't lose myself trying to convince someone to choose me. I deserved better than being someone's safest option after they'd finished exploring the alternatives. This time, I wasn't waiting for anyone to decide my future. I'd already chosen it for myself.